Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Hello, lovely people. Welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends, right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Today we have a returning friend, and I'm so happy to catch up with him because it's been a really long time. He first came on our show, gosh, it's been years at this point. I actually think he was one of our very first guests in the first year. So that would have been 2020. Yeah, 2020. So we have a lot to catch up on. It's been 4 years almost. So he's the managing editor of entertainment at Wealth of Geeks, and he's also a very accomplished novelist, and he just released his latest book, The Wrath of Comic Con, which brings his trilogy, Sex, Drugs, and Superheroes, to a close. I'm so excited to talk about that because the idea, I haven't been able to write one book, let alone 3 cohesive books that tells one cohesive story. So without further ado, please welcome back my friend, David Reddish. Hi, David.
Hi, Jordan. Thank you for that lovely introduction. You flatter me so much.
Absolutely. It's absolutely my pleasure. What the hell's been going on? So it was 2020, and then what happened?
Yeah. I mean, pandemic. I think we actually talked during the pandemic, if I remember correctly. So
yeah, I remember you started. I participated. You did those readings.
We did the table read.
Prayers, yeah, of all those wonderful superhero scripts.
Yes, it's so funny because I actually had drinks with a director friend last night, and those table reads still come up. He was like, how do you get these scripts? How do you find these people? Oh my God, I want to do this. Oh my gosh, these are amazing. So we left an impression, which is always nice.
Do you think that's something you'd revive?
Yeah, you're not the first person to ask. A lot of the actors have actually asked me if we would ever do it again. And I've said yes on 2 conditions. One, or I guess in 2 events. One being we somehow have the opportunity to do it live at a convention like Comic-Con or something. I would get all of us together and we would all go down there and we would do like a concert reading of Star Wars Duel of the Fates or George Miller's Justice League Mortal or whatever the case may be.
That would be actual a total blast.
Yes, it would. We may get sued, but who cares? The other possibility would be that, so I don't think you participated in the last couple of them. We did X-Men 1 and 2, early versions of X-Men 1 and 2, and those were very well received. We had a large viewership. People were very enthusiastic. We actually, the first X-Men was going to be our last one. And then we had such an immediate response. I had industry people, directors, producers that were actually messaging me and saying, where did you find these people? This is amazing. Like, we watched the whole thing straight through, and how are you doing this live? So by popular demand, we did X-Men 2. I said, if I find there's an early version of X-Men 3, which is a awful movie, but supposedly the early script is actually a little bit better, and there were certain scenes they didn't have time to film. So if I was able to find the early version of X-Men 3, we would do that, and I would bring back the same cast to everyone, reprise your roles, and let's go do it again. It was a blast to do those. It really was.
Yeah, and it was the perfect thing too, because it was the middle of shutdown, like early on in shutdown too. Like there was nothing else going on. Like everything was completely shut down. Everyone was still social distancing. There were no schools were still closed. There were no vaccines or anything. So it was a really, really fun excursion, specifically during that time.
Yes, it was a great thing to do. So what else have I been doing? Getting back to life. I have a new role as entertainment managing editor of entertainment at Wealth of Geeks, a fabulous new online magazine. And I have a new book that has come out.
Yay! Exciting. Well, so we'll get to the book. I want to talk about Wealth of Geeks. So yeah. I've been checking out, because Wealth of Geeks is totally new to me. And I find it so fascinating. It's almost like an all-in-one Condé Nast for geeks. Like there's entertainment, pop culture, finance, travel, auto.
Yes. we're a place for passion, is what we like to say. For if you are a passionate person, you have a deep passion for film, you have a deep passion for travel or exotic locations, you have a deep passion for automobiles, this is the place to go to find news, to find commentary, to find sort of deep dives, to find interviews. It's been a fabulous experience. I'm very, very blessed and lucky to have landed in their orbit.
Yeah. So when did you start your role as managing editor?
I started in August of 2023 last year, and it was serendipitous, to say the least. I had left my last job and was writing The Wrath of Comic-Con, but in the meantime was struggling to find work as a writer. Nothing new. We always get the shaft, right? Like when it comes to looking for work. On top of that, the industry strikes, the actors were on strike, the Writers Guild was on strike, which was hurting entertainment journalism across the board.
Oh, there was like nothing to write about.
No, it was a disaster. And I was up for all these really big jobs. I won't say where, I guess, for the sake of this conversation. Some of them were very, very disappointing to not get, because I got all the way to the final interview, and at least in one case was past the final interview. One was to be the lead writer on a talk show. The other was to be a lead movies writer for a major magazine. It was devastating that I wasn't getting these jobs. However, spoiler alert, I believe all of the people that did get those jobs have since been laid off in this industry-wide panic that we've seen in the past 2 months over AI and stupidity. I have many opinions and thoughts on that, which we could get into later.
We can definitely get into that, because someone just forwarded me a short film that was completely done by AI.
Oh Lord.
It's like, it was scary, it was shocking, because it actually looks pretty good. I mean, of course, things will improve, but it's like, oh my God, you don't need actors, you don't need writers, you don't need. And then I was also, so shortly after that, because I've been having a conversation with a friend of mine, she's a screenwriter, Carolyn Pierre Outlaw.
Okay.
And we did a panel. I think it was telling you, we did this panel at NYU, and on our way to dinner, we were talking about AI, and because she had a deal with NBC, and now she's talking to move it somewhere else. And things are, really weird writing wise. And I said, dude, I really think that everything's about to shift. And I almost feel like writers, in the sense that we know them, are going to be replaced with prompters. I think that's kind of like the next, I think that's the next thing. I think when you're studying in college, creative writing, if you're creative script writing, I'm so sure that in the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be some component, whether it's a class, whether it's a module, solely on prompting. I really think that it's here, and the genie's out of the bottle, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it.
I mean, I hope you're wrong. Certainly. I don't think, for the record, before we get too far off topic, honestly, everyone was talking about, writers are in danger, actors are in danger, and I don't think that's really true in the immediate, certainly, or even for the foreseeable future, insofar as, I don't know if you've ever read anything written by AI, but it is dreadful and makes no sense, and the AI programs don't know how to discern facts. They don't know how to separate that from opinion. They don't know how to sound like people or write with purpose. The big people who are really, I think, at risk for becoming obsolete in the wake of AI are visual effects and sound technicians, conceptual artists. These are things that AI actually does quite well. Automatic mixing and repairing of sound, automatic restoration of picture, creating, we've all seen the concept images of, Alejandro Jodorowsky's Tron, or all these strange, all the Republican senators all as drag queens. We've seen the concept artwork on Facebook and circulating on the internet. That is something that AI does, and particularly for effects artists, which has been a big issue the past year or so. Victoria Alonso leaving Marvel, causing all this chaos and revolt and uproar over the way that the VFX artists were being treated. Well, if you can replace them with AI that can work 24/7 and doesn't require any kind of payment at all, I think the studios are really salivating at that prospect.
Yeah, well, I just read an article, I think it was yesterday. There's an actress who does voice work for BBC.
Yeah.
And she received an email. They said that they weren't renewing her contract. They were going to replace her with an AI voice.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Right?
For sure. That's terrible. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm hoping I'm hoping that's not the case. I think AI voices generally still sound AI like. I listened to recently Prince Harry's memoir, and it was read entirely by AI, and the pronunciations were so bizarre in places. I went to talk to my father. I always called him Peh. You mean Pa? Okay, Peh. And there was some other word that he kept mispronouncing, and it was so comically distracting. Anyway, um, uh, we can come back to the AI. I want to actually answer your question about Wealth of Geeks. So I was doing some freelance work for a website called MovieWeb. I was working as their authority critic at the time. And I was down at the San Diego Comic-Con and I did one interview. It was the only interview that actually happened. I had this huge slate of like 10 interviews that I was going to be doing with all these A-list actors. It was very exciting. They all got canceled because the actors went on strike. And so I ended up interviewing the creator of Babylon 5, J. Michael Straczynski. Very cool guy. It was great conversation. I happened to meet another reporter named Paul Rose while I was there. And Paul kind of watched me do my thing in the interview room and emailed me about a week later and said, we should talk. I'm reading your work. This is extremely impressive. And he, I guess, had gone back and was reading some of my big stories that I'd done in other jobs. He read a big essay that I wrote on the 20th anniversary of Ang Lee's Hulk that I had written for MovieWeb. And he thought it was all very, very good. So a few days later, I'm on Zoom with he and his CEO, come to find out. And we had a basic conversation, and then out of nowhere, they offered me the managing editor job for more money than I'd ever been paid in my life. I don't mind telling you that part either. And I have to say, it's been possibly the best employment experience I've ever had. I have an amazing rapport with these people. They're all so sophisticated and kind and empathetic. I have an amazing team. I've been able to assemble friends, other journalists in the business who were maybe laid off or who were not being paid for the work they were doing. And these are extraordinary writers, many of them, extremely intelligent, extremely talented. And it makes me so angry that all these major outlets, places that are corporate owned, where they have extremely deep pockets, they don't want to pay their writers, but by all means, let's give our board of directors and our executives another like major $1 million bonus, not stopping to think about how many people that could keep employed for a year.
Yeah.
Michael Dinich, our CEO, really believes in equity in his company. He believes in sharing the wealth with his employees. So everyone's pretty well paid. Certainly as freelance gigs go, very well paid. And we all love working together. So I'm really,
That's
really lucky.
wonderful. When they brought you on board, did you have were you given like a mandate of like, hey, this is where we want to take our entertainment coverage?
Yes, to some degree. I think what sealed the deal. So I had worked for an LGBT magazine, online magazine called Queerty, and when I went in, it was very much oriented towards sort of clickbait, a very sexual, salacious kind of material, and it wasn't really serious journalism. And they had no entertainment coverage to speak of. So I made it my objective. We're going to establish an entertainment beat. It's going to be great. I want it to be on par with any other queer outlet. I want it to be on par with any other entertainment outlet that you would read, People Magazine or The Hollywood Reporter, Vanity Fair. And they fought me every step of the way on this. I had an incredible amount of pushback, but at the same time had was breaking major news stories that made international headlines more than once. That was generating amazing traffic, and suddenly celebrities were taking us seriously, and I was able to get the A-list people to sit down with us, and traffic was at an all-time high. I had done that for Queerty, and I think that was part of their motive. They said, okay, this guy can elevate us to the next level. So that's what I've been working on in my tenure thus far.
Would you have any because you've interviewed a lot of people, you feel like everybody.
Not everybody. There are a few left on the bucket list.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. Are there any specific people who you're like, okay, I really want to sit down with this individual. I really want to sit down with this person.
I mean, it's so many. I mean, I would love to sit down with Oprah Winfrey. I would love to sit down with Christopher Nolan. I'd love to sit down with Ian McKellen. These are extraordinarily talented people, but they've also had fascinating lives. They have
Hmm.
fascinating sort of biographies. And that's the thing I really like to get at in my reporting. I like to get at the personal connection between the artist and the artwork. And I like to ask how that sort of influences their choices of projects to accept.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Do you so like I said, I was really kind of bopping around the site. So I know it's mostly written content. Is there
Yes.
any is there any intention, or is there any plans, either in the near future and the long-term future, to move into video content as well?
Oh yes, oh yes. And I'm working on it. I think that's about all I can say. That was one of my major objectives. That was one thing I did in my last job, was they were not really doing much video content, and I said, this is the future. We want to push this. It's something that we can use on social media. And again, lots and lots of pushback, but again, that's sort of where they are now. And so I wanted to do the same thing for us at Wealth of Geeks.
Yeah, that's cool. You like, again, you've sat down with a lot of people, and like you said, you've broken a lot of stories. Are there any stories that you look back on and say, "Oh my goodness, like that was like one of the greatest experiences," talking to that person, or "Oh my goodness, breaking this story was one of the highlights, like when they write my obituary, this is going to be in paragraph 2."
There are certainly a few. There are certainly a few, and I feel like I've talked about this maybe even with you before. But briefly, I wrote an article with a former Sesame Street writer who outed Bert and Ernie as a gay couple.
Oh, I remember that.
And that was another one. Like, I actually defied my editor in chief. He said, "You absolutely can't do this because it's stupid and nobody cares. And why aren't you doing something sexual?" And I said, "Screw you, dude." And I did it anyway for no pay. And it ended up running when he was on vacation after sitting on the shelf for, I think, 3 months. And it
Oh my
made international headlines for a week. Like, it just kept going and going and going, and people lost their minds.
I
And
remember that.
it was a very strange day, I can tell you that much. But I'm really proud of it, not necessarily for what it showed that I am able to do. I'm proud of it because Mark Salzman, the writer that I interviewed, sort of had this massive career renaissance. He's staging shows off Broadway. He just had a show called now I'm not going to be able to remember what it's called right now. Romeo and Bernadette. There it is, which was an off-Broadway musical that ran, I think, for like 9 months last year in New York,
Yeah.
that he was able to get staged on the basis of this. He has other shows that he's workshopping right now that he's doing. I know a table read or I guess a small production. He already did the table read. He's doing a smaller production in Santa Barbara this summer, which is really exciting. He's working again, and he's in high demand, and people remembered how talented he is, and some of his work is undergoing a reevaluation. There was a film he did, for example, called Mrs. Santa Claus with Angela Lansbury.
I remember that.
Yeah. Well, no, he said, I didn't think anyone remembered it, which was how we got in touch in the first place. I did a piece on it, just sort of kind of mentioning it in passing, and he reached out to me to thank me for it. But since then, the movie has gained this enormous cult following, and it's like, I know it was circulating on YouTube. I think it maybe finally has a real streaming release somewhere. But
Yeah.
that's something I'm very proud of. The other side of that, I'll say, and this may sound trite, but it's true. People still come up to me when they find out that I wrote that story, young people, and say, "Oh my God, thank you. I always knew they were like me." This happened to me last October, actually. I met the daughter of one of my coworkers, who I believe she was 15 and had already come out as a lesbian. And she was asking me about the story, and she said, I want you to know that meant everything to me, because watching them as a little kid, I said, they're like me. I know they're like me, and they're not coming out and saying it. And so it was vindicating for her. It was vindicating for a lot of kids that grew up watching Sesame Street to say, okay, we have been here from the beginning. And it's a beautiful thing that I can look at these two people and see them as being passionately in
Yeah.
love with one another.
Yeah, so with a story like that, right? Because I remember when that broke, and I remember, like you said, everyone was losing their minds.
Very
Like,
weird. Yeah, it
like,
was
like,
wild.
it was like, yay, we knew it, or like, oh my God, how dare you say that about,
Yeah.
as the writer of that story, did you receive any blowback, either like through social media, or I guess no one writes letters anymore, or was like much of the conversation and like the heat given towards to your interview subject?
Well, that's interesting. I received very little in the way of blowback, actually, I'm happy to say. I don't think anyone attacked Mark outright, to his face. He was not doxxed. He was not receiving hate mail, and I did not either. Overwhelmingly, what both of us received was a lot of attention, number one. But it was a lot of positive feedback. I had people messaging me from Germany, from Spain, from Mexico, from all over the world saying, thank you for finally saying it. Thank you for finally saying it. We all knew. I had, a friend, a girl I knew in high school who is bisexual. She was not bisexual when we knew each other in school. She's since come out. She kept messaging me saying, I can't stop crying. You really did it. You really did it. I can't stop crying. Oh my God. I got these messages from her for like 2 days. That is really special, and it's really inspiring, and it makes me proud of the work that I do.
I know we've spoken before, just about kind of like, your career and how you navigated it and gotten to what you do. But was that kind of like a goal, young David wanting to be a professional writer, like to be able to kind of touch people, like all these different people from different places, from around the world, different languages,
absolutely
culture. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of my favorite movies is the Muppet movie, which is somewhat related to what we're talking about right now. But
I was always more of a Muppet Manhattan guy. Like that was
Muppets Take Manhattan is great. The Great Muppet Caper is great. But the original Muppet movie, maybe because it's more about Hollywood, or maybe because the key element to that movie, which I think is maybe the best movie ever made about following your dreams to Hollywood.
Yeah.
The thing that motivates Kermit and all his friends, they talk about the rich and famous contract. That is secondary to, I have the opportunity to make millions of people happy. And isn't that an amazing thing to be able to do? Absolutely. I was a very, very lonely kid growing up, and I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. I didn't have many friends, so I had movies. The Muppets became my friends when I was little. Later on, Spock or Luke Skywalker or Fox Mulder or Ellen Ripley, all these great genre heroes, action heroes, just movie actors that I loved watching. You develop this kind of relationship with the image, the moving image, and the characters. It makes the world a little bit brighter, a little bit less lonely.
Yeah,
and
they become your friends, right?
They do become your friends. And so absolutely what I always want to do with my work, whether it be as a journalist, whether it be as a novelist, whether it be as an on-camera personality, in any regard, I want to do this so people have something to believe in. And so they have that little bit of comfort. And so the world is not quite as scary and it's not quite as lonely. And maybe they're just a little bit happier.
Yeah. Have you ever tried your hand at screenwriting?
Yes, I trained to be a screenwriter and a film critic when I was in film school. And the screenwriting, when the big writer strike, the last writer strike happened in, I guess that was 2008. When that happened, I knew there was no way I was going to be able to sell a script for at least 5 years. I mean, at that point, the studios and the production houses were really throttling the amount of projects they were putting out. There were less movies, less low budget and mid-level budget movies being produced. It was all about the big budget stuff. And streaming at that point had not really taken off. And streaming's always kind of been a better place for series as opposed to films anyway. And I really wanted to work in film. So I decided I got to do something. So I'll try my hand at writing a book. And that became Sex, Drugs, and Superheroes, which was my first novel published. It is the first novel in the trilogy that I'm wrapping up this week with the release of the new book. So it ended up, it thrust me in an entirely different direction that I never really believed I would go into, but it's been a wonderful one.
Speaking of the new book, so this is the finale, like this is it.
This is it.
More. Did you, when you originally began that journey, the Sex, Drugs, and Superheroes journey, did you envision it as a trilogy, or is it kind of like one of those like George Lucasy or what's his name? The King Game of Thrones guy. It's like
George R.R. Martin,
yeah, or like a Francis Ford Coppola. Like, I got an idea. All right, I guess we're gonna do part 2. You like doing like
Yeah, I
was
mean,
it?
I think a lot of that is PR with all those guys. First of all, I mean, Marshall Lucas, George's editor and ex-wife, has since come out in the past 2 years and said, when we were doing it, when I was sleeping with George every night, he never once said we were doing anything beyond the first movie. He never once said anything about a sequel. That, that was later on. I think he was open to the possibility, and he definitely had ideas. Initially, when I was writing the book, I thought it would be a one-off. But when I was started pitching it to agents and to publishers, my friend, the author Tyler Compton, said, you really should pitch it as a series. I said, but it's a one-off. Like, I don't know what to do. And he said, just come up with some vague idea for what you're going to do. Because at that time, major series such as Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, the Divergent series, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, all of these were multi-book series. That was what publishers were really interested in. So I thought, well, actually, that's a really good point. And by the end of the book, I started to think, okay, well, there are things that I want to do with these characters a little bit more. And there are sort of little story threads in here that I would want to follow and flesh out, and little tricks that I was sort of doing with the text. We could talk about that more in a second, because that really pays off in the new book. So initially, I had an ongoing series in mind. I had the second and third book outlined, and I had the concept for what was going to be the fourth book ready to go.
Okay.
I wrote and published the second book in the series in 2015. Conquest of the Planet of the Geeks is the title. And it picked up 2 years later with the same characters and sort of picked up on the same story threads, did everything that I told you I wanted to do. What I didn't anticipate in writing that was how hard it was going to be. You hear it all the time. People say, oh, the sequels are so hard because it has to be as good as the first one, but it has to be better, and it has to sort of do things that are new, but it can't do too much new because it needs to feel like it's connected to the first one. So I wrote the book.
So with that said, is much of what makes it hard to write the sequel because you're more in your head about it, because you're not just like, oh, here are some characters, let me just like let it flow out of me. You're thinking about, well, it has to live up to the first, or it has to, is that part of what makes it difficult?
It's sort of, how do I not repeat myself, I think, is more the question that I had, because I wanted to use the same characters again. I had ideas for things to do that were new. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book. It's about a group of geeky friends, and they go to Comic-Con, and they all experience these sort of life crises as they are there, and they have these great moments of actualization, and they strengthen the bonds of friendship, and they explore their own creativity and find direction to their lives and
So
whatnot.
writing what you know.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to, in the second book, okay, maybe we're not going to spend so much time in the convention center. I don't want them all sitting in panels and just talking, because that's fun and the banter's fun, but it's not as action driven. I think maybe I want to do something where San Diego is more of a character. So they're going to be exploring the city a little bit more and getting out of it. And it's going to be about relationships outside of Comic-Con as well.
Right.
So I did all that, and I adopted, this is where, okay, this is the most pretentious thing I promise you I'm going to say this entire interview. I decided on a dialectical approach, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis idea for this. So when I sat down to write the second book, I knew it was going to be much, much darker. I knew that from the beginning. But as I was writing it, it deals a lot more with mental illness. It deals with extreme loneliness. It deals with substance issues. It deals with sexual dysfunction. It deals with a lot of much larger sort of problems, things that are true to life, in my experience, true to the Comic-Con experience for many, many people, but that are also, they're bigger problems. And the idea that you love your friends and they're your family and they're there for you, except when they are not. And, how do you deal with getting older, and your core group that maybe got you through your 20s is not going to be there anymore,
right?
Because they have to make their own choices. So the second book came out, and it's interesting. It was not especially well received when it hit the shelves, because it was so much darker. It was not exactly slammed. I was not slammed for it, but people said it's just so dark. Like, the first one's just, it's pure fun and it's pure love and it's so funny. And I said, yeah, but I did that. I need to do something else to sort of move this story further. in the past couple of years, the more people that have read it, it's sort of had this kind of renaissance where people have gone back and looked at it and said, oh no, this is actually great because it completely takes apart the first book and what you thought you knew about these people and this world, and reassembles it in a way where you go, oh, it also fits together this way, and it feels very different, but it makes me think a lot more. It makes me feel something a lot deeper when I read it. I just got, in fact, last month I got a note from a reader saying he just loved it so much and he couldn't believe how dark it was, but it's so much more powerful that way, and he loves the characters so much more, and he loved the book. So that's really, really gratifying.
What's your process? Like, do you write every day? Do you like wake up and just sit down and start typing? Or do you like kind of have like spurts of inspiration where like you might just write, and then you don't write for weeks at a time?
I think it kind of changes all the time. So writing this new book, The Wrath of Comic-Con, the third book in this trilogy, I sat down to write it. I'd done a lot of notes over the years, going back all the way to the first book, which was released 12 years ago. So you're probably talking about 15 years worth of notes and notebooks that I had, where I had to go through when I was writing the second book. And then again, the third book, I had to go through and find all my notes about these are the jokes I want to do, these are the character arcs I want to do, what have you, right? It starts with that. And it starts with just images. It starts with me hearing somebody say something or seeing somebody do something or feeling something in a certain moment or a certain situation. And the story sort of builds from there. In terms of the actual mechanics of sitting down to write it, that's the thing that kind of changes. This is my fourth book that I'm publishing, and I think writing all of them has been a very different experience. Writing The Wrath of Comic-Con, I thought, well, this is going to be easy. I have all this time, I had left my job. I'm just going to sit down and do it. But what actually happened was, first of all, I was rusty in that I was not used to writing prose anymore. I was used to writing journalism, and it's a very different beast to tackle, I would say. And it quite often it tackles me.
It feels like a gossip column, like character A,
yes,
seen at blah blah blah. And you're like,
yes, and it was a lot of starting and stopping, like getting back into the characters. I would write. Usually when I write, I wake up and I eat something and I go over the pages that I had written the day before and I correct things. I do some editing and some revision, and then I go over my notes and I go from there and just start writing new scenes. Now, the big problem I had writing Wrath of Comic-Con was that I would sit down and I would write all day and I would go back and I'd look at what I'd written and I would go, this isn't a scene. Like, it's just stuff happens and there's nothing that is realized. It's not moving the plot in the way I need it to. I need things to be realized. I need the plot to notch forward. I need the character arcs to notch that much higher.
And so you're like the Seinfeld of novels.
A novel about nothing. I won't go that far. I definitely think my books are about things. They're about some things. But the point is, I had to scrap a lot and go back and try it again in order to get a scene and a flow and a plot out of it. And it took about a year, I think, off and on. There are days where, if you're me anyway, there are days where it just comes and comes and comes and you can't stop. And then there are days where it just doesn't come at all. And I literally am pounding on my desk. I'm banging my head against the wall. I'm clawing my face off, just stripping off all my clothes and pulling my hair. And just, it's a violent process writing. And just I gotta get it on the page. It's not coming out. And actually, somebody who saw, pursuant to our earlier conversation, somebody who really helped me through that was Mark Saltzman. He and I have become good friends, and I reached out to him and I said, dude, I'm having the most trouble. Mark, who I don't believe has ever written a novel, I said, I'm having the most trouble on this thing. Like, please just tell me what to, like, what do you do? Like, how do you get through it? And he sort of coached me through it, and I eventually was able to finish it. I mean, it was done. I knew when it was done. I felt like I'd said everything I wanted to say with it. And for the most part, it is the book I intended to write.
Good. That's wonderful. So like, in terms of this being the finale, like, is that like true? Like it's done? Or do you think that maybe a little bit later you might say, actually?
I mean, never say never. Like that, first of all, I never in any way want to emulate And Just Like That, apart from just putting out a crap program that everybody hates that makes a lot of money and everybody watches it. I don't much like the idea of churning out crap, but we all got to make a living somehow. So, but I mean, that's a good example. You know, we were told The Godfather was a standalone movie. There ended up being two more because there was public thirst for it and because Francis Ford Coppola needed money. We were told Star Wars was done, but then George said, oh, no, I want to do my prequels, you know, whatever. And then we were told it was done again. And then Disney bought it because he was already working on what was going to be Star Wars Episode 7. They bought it and then made their own Episode 7 and threw all the work that he had done basically out the window. There's always the same thing with The Matrix. You know, these legacy sequels where, no, there won't be any more Ghostbusters. Well, now we have two more. You know, there won't be another Matrix, but now there is another Matrix. There won't be another Indiana Jones, but here you go. There won't be another Scream. Like we could go on and on about this, right? So the point of all of it is to say never. I like stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. As I was saying, the dialectical approach, it's like, well, the synthesis, this has to merge elements of the first and second books and sort of throw it at everybody and say, okay, you decide what this means. You decide what this story is really about now that you've seen me do my dog and pony show on the page.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll say about this, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, was I had the full outline for the third book and notes on what the fourth book would be. When I wrote the second book, it clocked in a little bit shorter than I thought. And I thought, you know, maybe I could have used one more subplot with this, you know, whatever. So flash forward 6 years when I sit down to finally write the third book, I can't find any of my notes on the third one. I'm going through my shelves. I'm going through all my notebooks. I'm going through, you know, like typed pages and scrap notes and like sticky notes. And I'm like, where did it go? Like, I had this. Where the hell is it? Could not find any of my notes. Wow. And by that point, I decided that I only wanted to do one more and then sort of move on to do other stories. Because the idea for what the fourth book was going to be was always going to be very, very wacky. I'd always intended the first three books be about the same characters and sort of fit together as a trilogy. And then maybe we would go back and visit this world with some other side characters from the first books, you know, sort of explore the world a little bit more. I had this really wacky idea for how I wanted to do that I was going to write maybe when I turned 50 or 60 or something. It was going to be me sort of looking at it as a much older person. Yeah. So I decided, what if I just combine these ideas? And the only way to do that was to go full on science fiction with it, which also seemed kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, if you read the first two books, there are science fiction elements. I really like postmodernism and sort of metatextual stories. So I had sort of littered in these sort of, what's really going on here moments.
Yeah.
So
the Muppets can go to outer space. Why the hell?
Yes, you know, why not? So plus these are characters that are obsessed with fantasy and comic books and science fiction and all these things. So as a sort of gift to them and the great change and joy that they brought to my life, it was a way to sort of pay them back and say, okay, you guys now are in a science fiction story. Now what are you going to do? That allowed me to find a new character who co-narrates the book. It's a parallel narrative where it's actually told from two different points of view, from two different characters. One of whom is in the distant future, which is this post-apocalyptic, frightening war zone, and the other is in 2012 at Comic-Con, you know, living his best life. So what does it mean when these two worlds collide? How are they related to one another? And I think ultimately, because I'm considerably older now than when I wrote the first book, you know, 10 years have passed, it sort of makes me look at myself and how I've changed as a person and how my life has changed. And so writing the new character allowed me to really approach that in a direct way. It also helped me get back to Liquin, the original narrative, my main character. It allowed me to get back to him in a new way. And so I was able to find all the characters again and put together this story that's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more, not complicated, but complex. I think it has more narrative complexity this time. It has more action this time. It's more challenging in some regards. And it's about the idea of when the choices of the past meet the possibilities of the future in the present. And when all time sort of folds in on itself, what does that make you think about yourself and your life choices?
Yeah. Huh. I like that. Do I'm just laughing because it's like right.
Yes.
No, it sounds like what everybody our age is going through now. So it's
I
like
mean,
it's
yes. It,
apropos.
it is about getting older, and I can't deny that or hide that. I would love to say, oh, I'm as optimistic and same person as I was when I was 27 and I wrote this, but I don't want to be 27 again. I mean, I like to be that youthful, like have that young of a body again, but I don't want to give up any of the wisdom or character that I built in that time, because I know you and I and everybody else, you go through a lot of really awful, awesome, beautiful, terrible stuff. That's just
Mhm.
what life is. And it offers so much wisdom and so much perspective. So it's sort of about the passing of that wisdom back and forth.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So coming to the end of this trilogy, so like I know, so I love television more than
Yeah.
anything. I think in fact during COVID, I think I finished television. Like I truly got to a point. Like
You'd
I
been through the
truly got
Scarecrow
to
and Mrs. King, every episode of Murder, She Wrote.
like seriously, you laugh, but it's true. Like I seriously, there was like nothing else left. And what I find myself, like when I'm watching television, but also when I read novels, I get so sort of like we were talking about the Muppets earlier, like they become your friends
Yes.
and they're your friends that you see on a daily basis. You check in with on a daily basis. I know that I sometimes like get to a place where it's like, oh my God, there's only one chapter left. Or, oh my God, there's only one episode left. It's almost like graduation again. Like, oh my God, it pains me. I'm probably never going to see these people again. How am
Yeah.
I going to deal with it? And like, I want to push it off. What is that like for you as a writer with these characters who have been in your life for 12 years? You get to that last sentence and then write the end or Finn, if you're really pompous, and know that like, oh my God, like is it hard to come to the end, or is it like, no,
I
that was good
mean,
and it was interesting, the story was told?
to me, I think it was more the story was told. I was ready to move on. It's sort of like house guests that you don't want to overstay your welcome. It's like if they stay too long, you just kind of end up hating them and you don't want to hang out anymore. I didn't want to do that with my characters. I didn't want to do that with my story. So I was happy to bring their stories to a conclusion. Like I say, and by the way, the ending of the story was written. I'd written back when we were going through the publication process of the first book. I sat down one day and I said, "This is how the series has to end," and so I wrote the whole scene out. I then, after finishing most of the novel, had to pull it out and say, "Okay, does this still work?" And for the most part, it did. And I added a little bit to it. But that being said, like I say, never say never. I don't feel like the door is completely closed. I just don't feel like I need to go into that room again anytime soon.
Right, like I get it. It's almost
Yeah.
like you have your friends, you have your old friends, you all have kind of grew up together, and you guys have all gone through life stages together, but you all live in different parts of the country, and it's like, oh my God, let's all meet in Vegas and have a
Yeah.
wonderful reconnection, and good, see you later. Like
Yeah. There's a little bit of that. And so I don't anticipate these characters popping up in anything for the foreseeable future, but obviously if there is incentive, if I feel there's something more I need to say about them, or if there is some kind of financial incentive, some kind of creative incentive for me to go back and sort of look at them again, I will happily do that. I'm not somebody that it's like good riddance. I will never touch it again.
right. Right. So
Yeah.
going back to the original book and these characters, what was, and again, okay, writing what you know, but what was that first spark that was like, that made you say, like, oh, this, like, was it one specific character and you had an idea of like wanting to tell, a story of this type of a person? Was it just Comic Con itself? And you're like, you know what, I'd love to tell a story about this universe because this is a world that I love. Like, what was the thing that sparked that?
It was definitely my first trip to Comic-Con. I wanted to write a story about it, and actually my friend, the writer director Darren Stein, he directed a film called Jawbreaker. He directed a
I
film
remember
called
John
GBF.
Baker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if he remembers this. After we had connected right after I'd come back from my first Comic-Con, and he said, "Well, this is your movie. You have to write this. This is, just it's about a guy at Comic-Con." And I sort of thought about that and I thought, there is a story to be told here. It took me a long time to sort of figure out how to tell that story and what it was going to encompass and entail. The other sort of inspiration for it, which I guess my Comic-Con experience has already been, has always sort of been this. It also recalls, summer camp when you're in high school and you're just surrounded by friends and everybody has this strange, unique bond with one
Hmm.
another. I wanted to write that joy and write that bond of wild antics where, oh my gosh, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. Isn't this so much fun? Isn't this great? I love you so much because you're helping me through this moment, and I'm so inspired creatively by you. That's the way I've always sort of been with my friends, certainly my close friends,
Hmm.
and that it's the all of the books, but particularly the first one was meant to be a love letter to that feeling and to those people and to that kind of relationship, and so the story just sort of grew out of that.
So do in terms of the folks that have really responded to it, do they get that, or do they glom like are you
Absolutely.
are you like or are you or have you been surprised that maybe some people have really glommed on to something that you weren't even conscious you were doing, or that you weren't even cognizant of, as far as
um
the relationships in the story, etc.
It's a bit of both,
Hmm.
honestly. It's a bit of both. Uh, I think what most people respond to is the idea of the feeling of community that you get when you go to a convention like that, and the joyousness of all of it, the joy of friendship, the beauty of it. People really do respond to that, and they respond to. So the way I wrote these characters, these are people that think in constant terms of pop culture. They will be at the grocery store and go, oh my god, I'm having a complete Star Wars moment right now. Oh my gosh, I'm on a date and this is totally like Luke confronting Darth Vader. They sort of see their lives in those terms, and there's a certain lexicon that comes with that, and so I wanted to put that on the page. People have really responded to that because I think they feel the same way. The thing
Yeah.
that I think surprised me the most that people really responded to in the first book, Liquin Sonos, the narrator, has this very uneasy relationship with a friend. His friend is in a long-term relationship, but they've decided to open their relationship. And so Liquid is really struggling with his feelings for this person of, well, he is extremely handsome and extremely sexy, and I absolutely lust for him, but does that mean I'm also in love with him? Would I fall in love with him if we took this to another level, if we introduced sex into our relationship? How do I know when a friendship is just a friendship and when love is really love and when sex is somehow both of those things? Where does it all land? I've
Hmm.
had people say, "Oh my gosh, I completely understand this. I don't quite know how I fit with all my friends. If there are no sexual boundaries, if I can have sex with friends, but that's also an expression of love, does that mean I'm going to fall in love with this person? Does that mean he's going to fall in love with me? Like, is this a dangerous thing we're doing?" That's something that people have really responded to.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's real.
It is real.
It's
It is
real.
real.
Everybody, especially in West Hollywood. No, but every
Well, true story. It's true story. And this is not limited to queer people either. More and more straight people that I know that are happily married, even with children, have open relationships because the thought is, well, is this the worst thing in the world? I don't pass moral judgment. I don't say that's what I do. And I'm in my relationships, I'm not condemning or endorsing that approach in any way. I just
totally,
think there's a story there. And so that was something I wanted
absolutely.
to explore.
There's
Um,
definitely a story, right? Because
yeah.
it isn't the worst thing in the world until it is.
Yes. With the second book, people really responded to mental illness. Liquid is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. People have really responded to that and to the struggle of, I want to be healthy and I don't know how to do that because it is literally my thinking that is infected with something that cannot be cured. So how do I live with this?
Yeah,
That's something I really wanted to, reflect some of my own journey and something I really wanted to put into prose. And now with the new book, not that anybody's really read it yet, the few people that have responded to the idea of sort of the moral and philosophical dilemmas that arise when you face your own past and face your own future, and the fact that your life choices will affect people you may never meet. And what does that mean for how I determine what I'm doing with my life, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I, for one, can't wait to read it. And
Well,
I'm sorry, what were you about to say? I
I was saying
interrupted.
I can't wait for you to read it either. I'm
I
looking forward. I'm excited for everyone to read it.
I can't. And I can't wait for the AI generated feature film version of it
Oh
either.
gosh, no. AI is not doing my movie. Period. This is not open to negotiation. Although they would still have to pay me even if they did make a movie with AI. You know, Lord only knows. The movie conversation is something that does come up every now and again, in all seriousness, and it's something that I've considered, and there is interest. One director says he really wants to do the trilogy as a Netflix series. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but it's also not my job. I just say, okay, tell me when you need me.
Do you think you'd be that person who's like very, very, because I mean, like, the age-old story, right? Like the moment that you sell your manuscript to a
Yeah.
studio, like the novelist is like thrown off to the side, and all of a sudden it becomes a period romantic comedy. Are
I
you
mean,
are you very, very protective of it, or how do you feel about that?
I'm not as protective or as sanctimonious as I think I was in the beginning. There were attempts over the years. There was an option to do the first book at one point, and there were cracks at a script that both I and other writers took. The big issue that I had with other writers sort of trying to write it was they didn't quite understand the characters. And
Mhm.
so I kept saying, no, Brigham wouldn't do this. Liquid wouldn't do this. Kate would not do this. Like, he wouldn't say it like that. That's something that I think I have to learn to accept and sort of say, okay, we'll go try it and maybe it will work better.
Mhm.
There are many adaptations that improve on their material. I think The Wizard of Oz is a great example. The book is a masterpiece of its own, but
Mhm.
the movie is a masterpiece in large part because it takes some liberties with the book.
Yeah. Well, because
Uh,
it's a different medium
it
and
is.
different convention, like the conventions of
Yes.
yeah, totally.
100%. There are other books. The film Children of Men, I think, is a masterpiece, and that movie has virtually nothing to do with the book,
Yeah.
apart from the premise. And that, but so I don't think it's necessarily bad to make changes. There's this talk right now. Warner Brothers wants to redo the Harry Potter series as a television series where it's going to be absolutely slavish to the books, and I'm going, this is, first of all, an act of desperation. It's like, can't we come up with something
Thank you, David
else?
Zaslav.
Oh, I have many thoughts on Mr. Zaslav. Many, many thoughts on
We'll
the junk
talk about that
peddler.
offline.
Okay, all right. It reeks of desperation, number one. But number two, the fact is, those 8 films adapting the 7 books are beloved. On the whole, they are extremely faithful to the novels upon which they are based. They are not word for word translation or transcription, but you don't transcribe when you're making a movie. You translate from page to screen. And so, of course, there are things that are left out, but that's because they don't really change the plot very much. I
Right.
don't I think it's a big mistake to think that more faithful automatically means better.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't. If you are true to the underlying principles, the underlying ideas of a work, Watchmen, I think is a fantastic example where both the movie is very, very faithful to the graphic novel, and I think the movie is great, and the television series is not. It's a sequel, but it is also faithful intellectually and spiritually. And so it's magnificent and a masterpiece of its own kind.
Hmm.
There's no right or wrong way to really ask the faithfulness question beyond, am I faithful to the ideas and the feeling and the message of the original?
I can't wait to both read the book and see how it may or may not be adapted in the future.
I'd absolutely love it if someone would pick this thing up and run with it.
So we have to wrap up, but to tell us where we can find you online.
You can find all my novels, the Sex, Drugs, and Superhero trilogy, which consists of Sex, Drugs, and Superheroes, Conquest of the Planet of the Geeks, and now The Wrath of Comic-Con. All 3 are available on Amazon and at fine retailers. The new book is only available in hardcover now, but the others are available, I believe, in paperback, audiobook, and electronic book as well. My fourth novel, which has nothing to do with the trilogy, is called The Passion of Sergius and Bacchus. That is also available on Amazon and at fine retailers. It's a very different kind of story. And you can find all my my work on Wealth of Geeks at wealthofgeeks.com. I'm lead film critic, so you find a lot of my movie reviews, a lot of my television reviews. You'll find me doing feature interviews with artists and celebrities. You'll find me doing deep dive features.
Awesome. Well, can I say it's always a blast catching up with you. I'm so
Absolutely,
glad
man.
you came in here today. You out there in Radio Land, we'll see you next week, or I guess you'll hear us next week, right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas.